In previous messages, we have reaffirmed that the OVA stands firmly against all forms of racism, discrimination, and hate. Yet sadly, I am here once again talking to you about it. In this new virtual world that we're operating in, it's clear that the members of our volleyball community are concerned about the disturbing trend of hate, violence, and xenophobic acts we're seeing against the Asian community, both in Canada and beyond our borders. We at the OVA, we condemn the hate, bigotry, xenophobia, or racism in our sport in general. But right now, it's really important that we stand with our Asian and Pacific Islander teammates, coaches, administrators, officials, colleagues, and families to make sure that we work towards them being heard in a safe environment that's protected by our sport. I'd like to also say that anti Asian sentiments have only been happening this year, but that is not the truth. Sadly, COVID 19 added fuel to a fire that's been existing, like it has on many other issues. A year ago, Mari Manalo, who's a Filipino Canadian, she was assaulted in a Toronto subway because the distinction of a Filipino and someone of Chinese descent was lost upon the attacker. In the same month, we had a 92-year-old Asian man who has dementia. He was attacked at a convenience store in Vancouver. And later on, we had a Buddhist temple in Montreal vandalized. And what does any of this have to do with the Asian community in volleyball, especially here in Ontario? It's safety. We are returning to sport slowly. It looks really bright with vaccines coming in and brighter, warmer days ahead. But we want to make sure that in our community and in our sport, persons of Asian descent, they can participate without fear. Looking at the incidents that happened last Tuesday in Atlanta, Georgia, random acts of violence are have been increasing over the last few months against persons of Asian descent, and we want to make sure that that does not happen in our sport. And if it does, that we're able to deal with it, whether you're from an Asian descent or not, that you can be an ally, that you can be support, that if you see an incident, you speak up, or you can record it and report it. So today, I'm privileged, and I really mean privileged, to have two persons who I enjoy working with and coaching with. And that's Daphne Choi and Angie Shen. Daph is, they're both many things. Daphne sits on our board, which is very good to have someone who is of Asian descent and female there, and that brings a perspective beyond our sport. She's also the head coach of the George Brown Huskies women's volleyball team and has contributed to our high performance programs for years. Angie, you may or may not have seen her. She is a master of hiding from the camera. So to get her on camera today is amazing. She has been our senior beach development coach and has been in and out of the entire OVA system for a long time, both as an employee, a coach, and as an athlete in university. So, Angie, Daphne, thank you for taking my phone call in late hours of the night last night. But to tell the truth, by the time I was thinking about it and I had my wife looking at me going, "Why are you so bothered?" You know, and why are there no cookies left? It's because I ate my feelings. Um, Going, man, looking on social media and wondering, people are speaking out about this. It's disturbing what's been happening, and I don't want this in volleyball. Like I don't want to have to go through another pack of this. It's empty, as you can hear. We should actually do something about it. So, firstly, thank you both for saying yes and coming on to discuss this today. So, Daphne, I just want to ask you first, personally, how have you been taking all of this anti-Asian sentiment that's been happening here in Canada specifically?
Well, the good news is I still have cookies. They're actually right there. They're
Oh,
just hiding right now. But
interesting.
the good news is I still have cookies. The bad news is I have a flood of emotions and they're all pretty negative. I'm angry. I'm confused. I feel almost a little bit. I feel almost a little bit selfish too. Maybe we can talk about that later, but I feel a little bit selfish, a little bit anxious. I feel a little bit scared. Um, and at the same time, I'm trying to remember to feel hopeful about what what we can do in this moment to improve the situation.
What about you, Angie? Like personally, how are you feeling?
Hmm. Um, it's funny because even listening to you speak, I'm more emotional than I think I realized I would be. Um, I can feel it, so don't be surprised if I start crying in this conversation. Um, it's it's something that's always been you kind of just push it aside. There's a lot of common normalized things that are said as you grow up, whether it be about what you're having for lunch, while others, I know Daphne will know this, and I'm sure Krish would too, actually. And it's just weird listening to this thing about this model minority because I was like, what does that mean? But like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because I didn't say a word. Like it's kind of okay, but yeah, so lately, just the last few days, there's been more conversations with my sister around whether it's safe for my parents and walk around, and I'm just like, this is weird. Why am I even thinking about this? So, anyways, that's how I'm feeling. Is that it's actually I didn't realize how real it would be.
Yeah, it's heavy is like you use the word heavy. Heavy is absolutely how I see like all my friends, especially my Chinese friends, and my coworkers, how they're feeling about it, how their families are feeling about it. Um, like I was lucky. I don't think I've grown up really with any sort of discrimination that I like serious discrimination that I felt. I've not had the lived experiences that you guys have had. Um, and I actually got into the sport because I looked up to uh, a fellow schoolmate um, who's Chinese descent, and if it wasn't for him, I don't think volleyball would have continued in my high school, and I would have not had the courage to participate in it. And so for me, this feels very strange that that all this anti-Asian sentiment has been happening. And I mean, as you can tell from the opening, I'm super worried about the impact on our athletes. Um, what happens if someone, you know, says something to them? I'm less worried about someone from in our community, but from someone who's outside saying something to them. And I know we can't protect everything, but sport is a space where we help each other deal with things, right? We don't have the privilege of being on court right now. We're all off court at the moment, so I wanted to open up that conversation. Um,
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that uh, anti-Asian racism and sport are not exclusive to each other.
mhm,
Um, if if you listen to Jeremy Lin talk about how the smack talk he receives when he's on the court, right? Um, it's a subtle, small thing, but he's not about to on the court, go into a rage in response about it, right? He moves on, but it's something that he holds on to and he remembers that um, even though he's trying to follow his passion of playing basketball, right? That's supposed to be his pride and his joy and his place to just be himself.
mhm.
um, and unfortunately he still gets attacked on the court.
Yeah, and I mean that is the highest level of basketball that you can imagine. So it's I mean, even us here in amateur sport are not immune to it. Have you guys ever had any lived experiences of that? I mean, you don't have to name names or anything, but since this stuff does stay with you, like you said, like, have you had to deal with that?
Do you want to go ahead, Daph, or
Um, like I've definitely experienced it off the court. As in blatantly recognizable off the court. Um, as a small example that I shared on my social media yesterday. There's been so many instances like over the years, like things that I just recognized immediately when they happen. So literally in August 1st, I'd given birth to my daughter, and I'm sharing a room with another family, and I'm holding my daughter who's a few hours old. And the next family is on a speakerphone call, and the other person on the line says, we can't come visit you and the baby in the hospital because of the Chinese. Thanks for the COVID, China. And this was like loud on speakerphone, and I just, if not for holding my newborn daughter, I probably would have ignored the fact that I'd just given birth and gotten up out of the bed. But all I could manage was, hey, like, easy there, like, relax. And those are like blatant things. But I almost feel, going back to my earlier point, I almost feel, I don't know about you, Angie, but I almost feel bad about recognizing that these things happen. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing solely, or if it's just that it doesn't compare to um, some of the other racial groups and things that they experience day to day. But me being blamed for COVID doesn't compare to fearing for my life when I step out of the door because of the color of my skin. So I almost feel a little bit guilty about even recognizing that that's an issue. But over the last few days, I've realized that it doesn't mean that it's not an issue, and so it's still important to talk about it. But to your point, about on the court, it's more subtle, I find, on the court for me. Off the court, it's a little bit more easy to recognize, but on the court, it's a little bit more subtle. Sometimes it has to do with more systemic things, like how we don't see a lot of Asian female role models in leadership positions in volleyball.
Mhm.
A lot of Asian females aren't, for example, varsity coaches or national team coaches. That just doesn't happen very often. Whether it's down to selection, things like whether or not you made the team because you were maybe didn't look like all the other players or didn't have the same build as them. Those are the more subtle things. I've heard a few jabs here and there, having to do with language or um, language or how I look over the years. Some people even questioning if like I'm speaking Chinese on the court, like little things like that.
Mhm.
But it's definitely less subtle for me on the court, but it's more blatant off the court.
What
uh,
about you, Angie?
yeah, so it's interesting because I've been really delving into safe sport lately and just really looking at those type of issues. And I if we talk about, just Daph, what you just talked about in terms of feeling bad, I totally understand what you mean. I see it a little bit different just within the last month, because it's almost like comparing it to grooming, where it's this really subtle culture shift that's harder to deal with, because you can't just like, if somebody comes and attacks you, just stop them and pull away. It's just this like overarching cloud of unspoken thing. I think that's why I'm almost surprised at how emotional I am about this. When you called last night, Krish, my stomach turned. Like I was like, oh gosh. And I just never expected it to turn.
Mhm.
And I think it's because of how big of an issue that is. Like if someone just calls me something, yeah, it's annoying, but that's not the issue.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? Like I definitely have lots of examples of, I taught spikes. That was probably my first job at the OBA, and all around Ontario, there was a lot of eye pulling, like, and just, but coming from like 7-year-old kids or little grade 2s and 3s, and you know it's not them, and it's sad because I'm like, "Holy," I'm looking at my colleague, I'm like, "Look what she's doing." And she's just like, "No." I'm like, "Look at," and it's not the kid, it's the what's around them, you know? I had a principal bring a kid to me to, the kid she made him apologize for calling me a chink in the bathroom. But she didn't say anything. She just actually, it wasn't an apology. He just wanted to acknowledge that he called me a chink. And, and this principal wanted me to know that they're doing centers on racism right now. And that was it. Like, what else?
Yeah.
So even that is just felt like a pretend band-aid, like, and they exotifying this issue versus really teaching compassion, this, that, empathy are all the same. So yeah, that's kind of what I thought about when Daphne was expressing that.
So like I guess this happens to like my version of Asian too, where you realize when you get older how conditioned you are to just pass stuff along. I've been deconditioned for some time, um, just because I don't know life, right? Um, but I also had parents who, and an environment that allowed me to do that, would allow me to question and speak up. I mean, parents try to protect their kids from this stuff all the time and teach them resiliency and coping skills by sort of pushing that stuff away. Um, but what advice would you have for upcoming athletes or your fellow coaches or even officials? Like, we're returning to play. If you're scared, should you be scared? And what should you do about it? Are you going to stay quiet about it, or I know that's a tough question to ask, but even from like an administrative point of view, but the Asian population is a giant population in our sport. They've contributed so much over the years. Even now, I mean, I had 2 months planned to have this conversation, 2 months from now, but I just think this thing's been so escalating that you know, why not deal with it now?
I think culturally, I know I can speak for the Chinese culture specifically. Historically, traditionally, Chinese women are encouraged to not make waves,
Mhm.
to present a certain way. Um, it's historically not um, celebrated to have a female who is tall, who works out, who's tanned, um, who is the breadwinner, maybe drives a motorcycle. Like there's certain things that historically are ingrained in that culture for their own reasons, good or bad. That's historically how it's been. So I know a lot of friends who've told me in the last few days that they grew up being told that Chinese women, Chinese girls should be seen and not heard. Um, and maybe they've been told that directly. Maybe they've figured that out from how they've been raised, just sort of subtly through how they've been disciplined over the years. Um, and so that's not necessarily, for some people, that's going to jive with their own personality. That's going to jive with their own introvertedness and not wanting to talk about it. So I think, to answer your question, like the first thing you can do is invite someone of this culture, whether it's any Asian culture or specifically in this case, affecting Chinese people, invite them into this airspace to talk about it if they want, and accept that they may not want to talk about it. There's going to be some people who, based off of that cultural tradition, they just may not feel like voicing anything about it, even though they may feel very strongly about it. Their lack of speaking out about it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't empathizing with it or have very strong emotions about it. But inviting that space, that airspace to people, I think is the first step. So I know for me, sometimes I feel like because of what's going on with other marginalized groups, whether it's Black groups, Indigenous groups, trans groups. Sometimes I don't feel like I should take up that airspace, but having an invitation to talk about it is really inviting, and it helps me to educate people and to honestly make me feel better about it. So I think that's the first part I can think about.
What about you, Choi?
Um, it's interesting because definitely, the more that, we see different people of different cultures, of Asian cultures kind of speaking up, um, I think that definitely helps in terms of kind of breaking that cycle of kind of, we're modeled by our grandmas and grandpas and parents and stuff like that. I'm pretty lucky where my mom is a very outspoken Asian mom, but I mean, she definitely has her own conditioning as well. The one thing though I think about is this concept of culture in on the team or around us, and not necessarily exotifying it in the sense where it's about Asians, it's about blacks, it's about whatever, it's about gender, it's about sexuality, and that was probably the hardest thing that I found in when I was in teachers college was we would have different talks about inclusion, but it was more about each separation of each, when the truth is if we really learn to build a culture in a really safe environment. I don't even know how to say safe environment without being like a cliche word now. But the people around us will protect each other. The you hear something, the little 12-year-old hears something that doesn't seem appropriate, will just, hey, I'm not what you mean by that, and that almost needs to be the movement, um and the change, um, at the root of it, you know? That's kind of my gut about that.
I really love both those pieces of advice, to be quite honest.
I
Um,
think also I just want to add I think the whole idea with systemic racism is people need to really check themselves a little bit. Um, it's really easy to say I'm not racist. It's really easy to say that. Um, but even friends of mine have come up to me recently and said, I realized I'm contributing to the problem unknowingly. I'm small things I may have said or done that don't seem like anything to you can actually be evidence of the system, right? Um, and until you do a really deep dive and really question the things that you say or do, it it you may not even realize it. I know I've done that for myself, and I found fault in myself. Just even in the last year, I've done some soul searching on that, and I haven't done enough. And it's important to note that like that's the whole point, is that people may not even realize that they're doing it, or reacting a certain way, because that's how it's been so ingrained. So yeah, I don't have any better way of saying it other than just check yourself a little bit. And if you don't know, ask someone of that community like what they've gone through. Even like small things to big things. Like I can give examples of a lot of small things, and those small things are again evidence of like ingrained systemic racism.
Just I have a thought. Sorry, can I just add?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Just around like I think there's a lot that, you know, us as an Asian culture, and I mean, I think Daphne, you and I are ones that have definitely stepped out of our traditional roles.
Yes.
I, was doctor, computer scientist. Like I went through all that before I just kind of ran right back into teaching because I wasn't supposed to be a teacher, and I'm coaching. Um, I don't want to say it's just other people. Like we need to, and I think that's what's great is, oh, if we can show, or even people can just show each other that they step up and, to be honest, face your parents that you want to do something that you're passionate about. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to just say there aren't people more, Asians coaching or more Asians, whatever, just because it's a systemic outside. I think it's within our own culture that, there's a lot of unhappy Asian people doing careers that they don't like, but they're making a lot of money. As a kind of one branch example. So that's just kind of a thought I have about that. I don't think a lot of Asian parents would like hearing that I just said that, but
Hey, my parents didn't. So
But it's so true. Like the typical, I would guess that the typical Asian parent would look at Angie and I and think that we broke the mold,
mm,
yeah,
same here.
that we didn't fit it and we did something different and maybe aren't. And that's another challenging part of it, right? Is there's also this desire to be a certain way and to enjoy some of the positive things about our culture without also being judged by that side. So, for example, if my Chinese isn't great, I also get judged from the other side. I'm sure Angie can relate to this massively. If I say a word wrong, or I can't read Chinese a certain way, or I can't watch movies or news, that's coming from the other side. So, but at the same time, if I turn on my TV, all the news that I hear right now is in English. Everyone that I talk to right now, I speak English. So there's a very um, challenging clash between the two cultures that you want to um, enjoy the best of both, but you have to be willing to also take some of the negative of both as well. And then for Angie and I, it's about saying, well, we don't really care if we have to face negative things about that or not fit into a certain mold. Either way.
Mm, very true. Very true. So before our time runs out here on Zoom, I want to ask you guys, ladies, however you identify, happy people, um, beyond a statement from the OVA, what do you suggest we do? I know that's a deep question, and it might open up more discussions and more of these videos in the coming months. What do we do for our members who are of Asian descent if they feel unsafe? What do you suggest?
I don't think currently that there is a good platform, a good avenue for people who don't feel safe to speak. There may be something in the works or something that currently exists. But I'll tell you right now, if something happened to me right now, I would have to Google what I could do in order to feel better about that. And
Mhm.
for us to not be proactive about that is going to be our downfall. So to be proactive about identifying what to do when something like this happens is going to help. Secondly, I think ensuring that and encouraging members to stand up and stand up to things when they happen and when they hear them is going to be really important. So if you're on the court and you hear something being said, it's going to be really important to say something at that moment and not let it pass, to bring it up. If you're an athlete on the court and you hear something, bring it up to your coach. I would say bring it up to an official. As an official, I would love to hear that if that's happening right then and there. Because as an official, there's mechanisms that I can take in order to combat that. And that's on everybody. That's as coaches, as athletes, as parents, especially as parents. If you hear or see these kinds of things happening on the court, it has to be acknowledged and recognized right in that moment. Don't wait till the match is over. Do it right then and there, and that will really validate, that person's feelings on the court at the moment. And I guess the last part for me that I would really love for the OVA to do is to highlight what volleyball has been for the Asian community. There is a
Absolutely.
huge Asian volleyball community. If members have never heard of what 9-man volleyball is, go look at it. It's huge. And we haven't done a good enough job of that at highlighting, what that has done, and people have had to do that themselves. And it's time that people who aren't part of that community recognize the validity of that and how it affected immigrants, what it had to do with the Chinese Exclusion Act, how for some men whose families weren't, in America or Canada, how they survived using the sport of volleyball and coming together as a group to play, that is a huge piece of history that the average volleyball player in the OV, I guarantee you, does not know about. And it's important to know. So those are my pieces. Angie?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to add on, even beyond our borders, setting and spiking, they weren't invented at the beginning of the sport. They came out of the Philippines in the 1920s. You know, all the mechanisms you use for quick sets. You're a big, tall middle. Thank Asians for developing that. And I mean, there's so much more. You'll never play volleyball that wasn't made by an Asian. I mean, the contribution is in every fabric of everything that we do. Angie, let me hear you.
Um, my gosh, this conversation could go a long time. It could, eh? If we
Yeah,
kept
you've got 1 minute.
it. I would say that I mean everything that Daphne said, absolutely. Again, just me delving into safe sport lately has really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things, and one of it is just the comfort level of people speaking out. And yes, people need to speak up, but if the culture isn't there and the environment isn't there where they feel like they're safe to, that's going to be the challenge, whether that's from the official, from the coach, from their teammates. And I don't know what can be done about that, but I'm really lucky. I hope the athletes on Team O feel this too, but where they have the opportunity to just speak up, even if it does feel like it's no big deal. Because that's kind of the part that we want to speak about. Not that just telling on someone, more so just, geez, let me explore these feelings that are coming up in me just because I brought dumplings for lunch. Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
need to, like, who do I talk to just to explore this a bit? Not necessarily vent about it, but like have an opportunity to really talk about where this is coming from, and looking at that, start looking at what piece I play in supporting improving this environment for myself and the people around me. That's probably the biggest thing as far as like how. Oh my gosh, like I wish there was a way that it's not like a support line in the sense of like, just tell on, but I wish there was a way where athletes, coaches, people, whoever, there was some sort of support line, like actually like social support, just to converse. Like I feel like I want to be like, go ahead, call me. I mean, but I don't know. Like obviously we have a lot of members, but I mean, just the opportunity to talk and work through the feelings. And I don't know where that comes from though, or how
Cool.
that can be created.
I'm sure Angie would agree. If anyone has any questions and wants to speak directly to her or I about or ask a question,
Mhm.
through you, I'm happy to receive emails or answer questions. I think it's important to the more we talk about our differences, the more those differences aren't differences. So I'm happy to do
Thank
that.
you for volunteering to do that.
Yeah, I definitely am with Daphne on that. I'd love to be there to support anybody who needs, a place to express their voice. But Krish, I have to thank you for initiating that, and thank you for taking that as strongly as you did within your physiology about it. Like I know that it means something to you, and that means a lot to me that it meant something to you. So thank you.
That's what I guess I'm here for. I guess, let us work together to support an inclusive, like learning and working environment in volleyball within our community, where all members could be welcomed, respected, and supported. And we can actually act on both those suggestions in the coming months. I don't see any reason not to. A support line may be different, but creating a forum where these things can be discussed when we have our symposiums, or if we want to have a separate forum in our high performance camps, or just generally, these spaces can be made. We're virtual now. We can do it. So, ladies, I just want to say thank you very much for coming out and taking your Friday and taking my late call last night and talking about this heavy topic. But I hope that it's given some of our members some stuff to think about, a peace of mind, and even open enough to just shoot me an email. You can just find me on the OVA website. All right. Um, Enjoy your weekend and please get out and get some sunshine.